Then, when it was the 7th night, she continued, I have heard, O auspicious king, that, when the fish spoke, the girl overturned the pan with her staff and then left by the way she had come, with the wall closing behind her. At that, the vizier got up and said, This is something which must not be kept from the king. So he went to the king and told him the story, explaining what he had seen for himself. I must see this with my own eyes, said the king, and at that the fisherman was sent for and told to bring another 4 fish like the others. He went down to the pool with 3 guards as an escort and brought the fish immediately. The king ordered him to be given 400 dinars, after which he turned to the vizier and told him, Come and cook these fish in my presence. The vizier did as he was told, brought the pan and, after preparing the fish, he put the pan over the fire and threw them into it. As soon as he did so, the wall split open and out came a black slave, tall as a mountain or like a survivor of the race of Ad. In his hand was a green bough, and he asked in a hectoring voice, Fish, fish, are you true to your old covenant? The fish raised their heads from the pan and replied, Yes, yes, we keep to our covenant. If you return, we return. If you keep faith, then so do we, but if you go off, we are quits. The slave came up to the pan, overturned it with the branch that he was holding, and left by the way that he had come. The vizier and the king looked at the fish and saw that they were now like charcoal. The king was amazed and said, This is something that cannot be kept quiet, and there must be some secret attached to them. So he gave orders for the fisherman to be summoned, and when the man came, the king asked him where the fish came from. From a pool surrounded by 4 mountains, replied the fisherman, and it is under the mountain outside the city. The king turned and asked, How many days' journey is it? And the fisherman told him that it was half an hour away. This astonished the king, and he ordered his troops to mount and ride immediately, with the fisherman at their head, while the fisherman, in his turn, as he accompanied the king, spent his time cursing the Ifrit. The riders climbed up the mountain and then went down into a broad plain that they had never seen before in their lives. Everyone, including the king, was filled with wonder when they looked at it and at the pool in its center, set as it was between 4 mountains, with its fish of 4 colors, red, white, yellow, and blue. The king halted in astonishment, and asked his soldiers and the others there whether they had ever seen the pool before. King of the age, they replied, never in all our lives have we set eyes on it. The elderly were asked about it, but they too said that they had never before seen the pool there. The king then swore by God, I shall not enter my city or sit on my throne again until I find out the secret of this pool and of these fish. He gave orders for his men to camp around the mountains, and then summoned his vizier, a learned, wise and sensible man, with a knowledge of affairs. When he came into the king's presence, the king said to him, I am going to tell you what I want to do. It has struck me that I should go out alone tonight and investigate the secret of this pool and of these fish. I want you to sit at the entrance of my tent and to tell the emirs, viziers, chamberlains and deputies, as well as everyone who asks about me, that I am unwell and that you have my instructions not to allow anyone to come in to see me. Don't tell anyone what I am planning to do. The vizier was in no position to disobey, and so the king changed his clothes and strapped on his sword. He climbed down from one of the mountains and walked on for the rest of the night until morning. He spent all the next day walking in the intense heat, and carried on for a second night until morning. At that point, he was pleased to see something black in the distance, and he said to himself, Perhaps I shall find someone to tell me about the pool and the fish. When he went nearer, he found a palace made of black stones plated with iron, one leaf of whose gate was open and the other shut. Joyfully he stood by the door and knocked lightly. On hearing no reply, he knocked a second and a third time, and when there was still no answer, he knocked more loudly. When no one answered, he was sure that the palace must be empty, and so, plucking up his courage, he went through the gate to the passage that led from it, and called out, People of the palace, here is a passing stranger. Have you any food? He repeated this a second and a third time, and when there was still no reply, emboldened and heartened, he went through the passage to the center of the palace. This was furnished with silks, starry tapestries and other hangings, but there was no one there. In the center was an open space, leading to 4 halls. There was a stone bench, and one hall next to another, then an ornate fountain and 4 lions of red gold, from whose mouths water poured, glittering like pearls or gems. Round and about were birds, and over the top of the palace there was a net of gold that kept them from flying away. But the king was astonished and saddened that he had not seen anyone whom he could ask about the plain, the pool, the fish, the mountains, and the palace. He was sitting between the doors, sunk in thought, when suddenly he heard a plaintive sound coming from a sorrowful heart, with a voice chanting these verses. I try to hide what I suffer at your hands, but this is clear, with my eyes exchanging sleep for sleeplessness. Time, ye either spare me nor cease your work, and it is between hardship and danger that my heart lies. Have you no mercy on one whom love's law has abased, or on the wealthy who is now made poor? I was jealous of the breeze as it blows over you, but when fate pounces, then men's eyes are blind. What can the archer do if, as he meets the foe, his bowstring snaps just when he wants to shoot? When cares mass to assault a man, where can he flee from destiny and fate? When the king heard this lament, he got up and, following the sound, he found a curtain lowered over the door of a room. He lifted it, and behind it he found a handsome young man, well-made, eloquent, with a bright face, ruddy cheeks and a mole on his cheek like a disk of amber. He was seated on a couch raised 1 cubit from the ground, and he fitted the poet's description. There is many a slender one whose dark hair and bright forehead have made mankind to walk in dark and light. Do not find fault with the mole upon his cheek. I would sell my brother in exchange for such a speck. The king was glad to see him, and greeted him. He, for his part, was sitting there wearing a silk gown embroidered with Egyptian gold, and on his head was a crown studded with gems. He was showing signs of grief, but when the king greeted him, he replied with the utmost courtesy, Your dignity deserves that I should rise for you, but I have an excuse for not doing so. I excuse you, young man, said the king. I am your guest, and I am also here on an important errand. I want you to tell me about the pool, the fish, this palace, the reason why you are here alone, and why you are weeping. When the young man heard this, tears coursed down his cheeks, and he wept bitterly until his breast was drenched. He then recited, Say to the one to whom time grants sleep, how often misfortunes subside only to rise up. While you may sleep, God's eye remains sleepless. For whom is time unclouded, and for whom do worldly things endure? He sighed deeply and continued to recite. Entrust your affair to the Lord of all mankind, abandon care and leave aside anxious thoughts. Do not ask how what happened has occurred, for all things come about through the decree of fate. The king, filled with wonder, asked the youth why he was weeping. How can I not shed tears, he replied, when I am in this state, and he reached down to the skirts of his robe and raised it. It could then be seen that the lower half of his body, down to his feet, was of stone, while from his navel to the hair of his head he was human. When he saw this condition of his, the king was filled with grief and regret. He exclaimed in sorrow, Young man, you have added another care to my cares. I was looking for information about the fish, but now I see I must ask both about them and about you. He went on to recite the formula, There is no power and no strength except with God, the exalted, the omnipotent, and added, Tell me at once what your story is. Listen and look, said the young man. My ears and eyes are ready, replied the king, and the young man continued, There is a marvelous tale attached to the fish and to me, which, were it written with needles on the corners of the eyes, would be a lesson for all who can learn. How is that? Asked the king, and the young man replied, You must know that my father was the ruler of this city. His name was Mahmud, and he was the king of the Black Islands and of these 4 mountains. He died after a reign of 70 years, and I succeeded him on the throne. I married my cousin, who loved me so deeply that, if I left her, she would neither eat nor drink until my return. She stayed with me for 5 years, but then one day she went in the evening to the baths. I told the cook to prepare a quick supper for me, and then I came to these apartments and lay down to sleep in our usual place, telling the slave girls to sit, one at my head and one at my feet. I was disturbed because of my wife's absence, and although my eyes were shut, I could not sleep and I was still alert. It was then that I heard the slave girl who was sitting at my head saying to her companion, Masuda, how unfortunate our master is and how miserable are the days of his youth. What damage he suffers at the hands of that damned harlot, our mistress. Yes, answered the other, may God curse treacherous adulteresses. A man like our master is too young to satisfy this whore, who every night sleeps outside the palace. The girl at my head said, our master is dumb and deluded in that he never asks questions about her. Do you think that he knows about her and that she does this with his consent? Exclaimed the other, adding, she prepares him a drink that he takes every night before he goes to sleep, and in it she puts a sleeping drug. He knows nothing about what happens or where she goes. After she has given him the drink, she puts on her clothes, perfumes herself and goes out, leaving him till dawn. Then she comes back to him and burns something under his nose so that he wakes from his sleep. When I heard what the girls were saying, the light became darkness in my eyes, although I could not believe that night had come. Then my wife returned from the baths. Our table was spread and we ate, after which we sat for a time talking, as usual. Then she called for my evening drink, and when she had given me the cup which she had poured out, I tipped the contents into my pocket, while pretending to be drinking it as usual. I lay down immediately, and pretending to be asleep, I heard her saying, sleep through the night and never get up. By God, I loathe you and I loathe your appearance. I am tired of living with you and I don't know when God is going to take your life. She then got up, put on her most splendid clothes, perfumed herself, and taking my sword she strapped it on and went out through the palace gates, while for my part one got up and followed her out. She made her way through the markets until she reached the city gate. She spoke some words that I could not understand, at which the bolts fell and the gate opened. My wife went out, without realizing that I was following her, and passed between the mounds until she came to a hut with a brick dome. As she went in through its door, I climbed onto the roof and looked down to see her enter and go up to a black slave. One of his lips looked like a pot lid and the other like the sole of a shoe, a lip that could pick up sand from the top of a pebble. The slave was lying on cane stalks. He was leprous and covered in rags and tatters. As my wife kissed the ground before him, he raised his head and said, damn you, why have you been so slow? My black cousins were here drinking, and each left with a girl, but because of you I didn't want to drink. She said, my master, my darling, delight of my eyes, don't you know that I am married to my cousin, whose appearance I hate and whose company I loathe? Were it not that I am afraid for you, I would not let the sun rise before the city had been left desolate, echoing to the screeches of owls and the cawing of crows, the haunt of foxes and wolves, and I would move its stones to behind Mount Kaf. You are lying, damn you, said the black man. I swear by the chivalry of the blacks, and don't think that our chivalry is like that of the whites, that if you are as late as this once more, I will never again keep company with you or join my body to yours. You are playing fast and loose with me. Am I here just to serve your lust, you stinking bitch, vilest of the whites? As I looked on and listened to what they were saying, the world turned black for me and I didn't know where I was. My wife was standing weeping, humbling herself before the slave and saying, my darling, fruit of my heart, if you are angry with me, who will save me, and if you throw me out, who will shelter me, my darling and light of my eyes? She went on weeping and imploring him until, to her delight, she managed to conciliate him. She then got up and took off all her clothes. My master, she said, is there anything for your servant to eat? Lift the pan cover, he said. There are some cooked rat bones beneath it that you can eat, and you can then go to this jar and drink the remains of the beer there. After my wife had eaten and drunk, she washed her hands and her mouth before lying down naked on the cane stalks with the slave, and getting in with him beneath the rags and tatters. When I saw what she had done, I lost control of myself, and climbing down from the top of the roof, I drew the sword that I had brought with me, intending to kill them both. First I struck the neck of the slave, and thought that he was dead. Morning now dawned on Shahrazad, and she broke off from what she had been allowed to say.